When it comes to 3D printing, the hobby has evolved so much over the past couple of years, especially since I first started. Not only are 4K screens, 2K screens basically gone by the wayside, things like 12K, 8K are all just at our fingertips. The quality of miniatures is almost comparable to that of mold making itself, and it's really exciting to be here at a time where I can pop a model on and it basically has the same quality as something that I'm going to pick up off a Games Workshop shelf. Not only have printers come a long way, but the resin that we use is incredibly different to that of a few years ago. I currently have a resin in my possession that is just like plastic, and we're going to be using it today to 3D print up an entire Death Corps of Krieg combat patrol. Now, the main focus of this video is trying to see how much it's going to cost me to 3D print an army. My main goal today is to see exactly how many models I can get from one bottle of resin, and to see if it's possible to make an entire combat patrol. This is usually the entry point for a lot of people into things like Warhammer and Age of Sigmar, so I think it'd be a good base point to see whether or not it's worth it getting into 3D printing, especially in 2024. Today I'm going to be 3D printing an Astra Militarum combat patrol, which retails for roughly about $265 from Games Workshop themselves, but you can find it at a discount from places like secondhand retailers for roughly about $200. Its competition today is a 1 kg bottle of Sunlu high toughness resin, and before I get into it, if you want to grab a bottle for yourself, I have affiliate links down below so you can support the channel by doing that. Everything today will be printed on my Anycubic Photon Mono X, which, if you do look at it, is quite a few years old at this point. But this printer has been my absolute workhorse and not skipped a beat since the day I bought it. It's running an original screen. I have only ever changed the FEP once, and it is an absolute monster of a machine. We're going to see if it still holds up in today's market. Now, everything is going to be sliced in the free version of Chi2 box. Now, I tend to switch between Lychee and Chi2 depending on how I'm feeling. Using Chi2 is going to give us an excellent opportunity to see how long it's going to take to print our models, as well as see how much resin it's going to take per plate to print these bad boys off. The models that I'm using today are from Stationforge's Grimguard range, and I am absolutely in love with their entire range. This video is in no way sponsored by any of the companies that I mentioned in today's video, but I just want to share what I love about the hobby and the companies and products that I use that really help me bring it to life. The best part about these models is the fact that they come pre-supported. Now, this is the first time I've ever used this resin, so first things first, before we can start printing everything, we have to make sure that it's dialed in. And this is easy enough because on the front of this Sunlu high toughness, it has the exact settings that we need to use for our prints, which I have to super highly commend Sunlu for doing that. Because the majority of the time, I do understand that it can be different from machine to machine, but it's very nice to have a base point that we can just use and tweak later on down the track, so that at least we can get something printing without having to futz around with all the different mini settings and things. All I had to do was slice our file up and then get it printing, which at this 2.5 exposure time took roughly about 4 hours for this single model, which in hindsight is a lot longer than I'm used to waiting for a single miniature, or even just a standard size miniature. So we're going to be making some adjustments. Fortunately enough, he came out absolutely flawless. Now I've got my Anycubic wash and cure station here, filled with a bunch of methylated spirits. Now I'm going to be washing him for roughly about 4 minutes. I tend to find that this is the sweet spot for washing miniatures, and after putting him in the Creality wash and cure station in my clean methylated spirits, now it's time to get this bad boy assembled. And if you've been on the channel for a little while, you know exactly how I'm going to be doing this. Now, I didn't record this process for every single model because they're all going to be assembled in the exact same way, but it just depends on what parts each model has. I first started by quickly scoring the model just on the joints because we want to come in with our super glue and give it a nice strong bond so that when we tap it together, it's not going to fall, break, or just tear apart. It gives it a little bit more grip and really allows it to hold onto each of the pieces. And I do find that this tends to speed up the drying time just a little bit. Once he was fully assembled, it left me with this handsome lad. And at a cost of only 35 cents and 6.5 mil of resin, I think we're off to a good start. Before I get into the rest of the squads, I do want to mention that I won't be printing any of the bases or including them in our resin calculations today. For the majority of this, I don't usually print bases with my models. I either have the ones that I buy from Games Workshop themselves, because it's quicker and easier and it saves me a bunch on resin. For these guys specifically though, I will actually be using my own personal basing pack. Now, this is something that I've designed myself, and if you want to pick it up for yourself, jump on down the description down below and it'll take you to my cults page. Doing so helps support the channel, and I am forever updating the pack. It has been a while, but I have massive plans over the next coming week to add a couple more things and flesh out the range. But right now, there are a full set of 25 and 32 mil bases, as well as some 40s and 50s to really flesh out your Death Corps of Krieg and Astra Militarum armies. Feel free to grab that from the description down below, and I would really appreciate if you do. Thank you to everyone who does. Y'all are massive hobby heroes to me. Up next, I wanted to cut the printing time of these models way down. So I adjusted the exposure time to 1.9 seconds and a light off delay to 0.75 seconds. This means that our layers are going to be pumped out faster than ever and really get these models printing quick. With those changes, I loaded the Plague Doctor up and got him printing right away. And lo and behold, we have a successfully printed model. Now, this guy was really easy, and I'm impressed with how well the supports have been holding up on these models. This Plague Doctor took only 4.45 mil of resin at a whopping cost of 24 cents, which brings our grand total up to 59 cents for both models. With two perfect prints, it's time to jump on to the bulk of this entire combat patrol, and that comes in the form of these Grimguard Infantry, which I am super excited to get loaded. Luckily enough, 20 of these guys actually fit on one plate on my Photon Mono X, which is super convenient because that's exactly how many we need to get this combat patrol started. Now, these guys printed up super quick in roughly just under 3 hours, and I was really impressed with how they were looking. Until I got a little bit closer to my printer, and unfortunately the majority of them failed, which was a little bit disheartening, but I had a bit of a think to myself. And I did remember that these files were actually from one of the old things that Stationforge released. And if you don't know, Stationforge has actually committed themselves to going back in their previous catalog and updating all of their pre-supports, which I 100% admire. Now, I hadn't downloaded these files for a very long time, and I realized that I had actually been running the old, previously precarious supports, we'll call them. And fortunately enough, they had actually updated all of these guys. Now, I figured I'd quickly load up a plate of the old and the new models just to show you exactly what's going on here. Now, the first thing that I noticed when it came to these models was the fact that they were printed with their feet completely horizontal to the build plate. This often isn't a very good practice when it comes to 3D printing, as these minute little layers can either peel or just completely fail because of the peel force that's behind them. Now, you can fix this by having really beefy supports, but that tends to leave a lot of little poff marks on them. So in these new ones, as you can see, they had angled them ever so slightly, which does gradually increase the time it takes to print, but overall worth it because you're not having to come back and reprint these guys. With all that fixed, I loaded up 20 of the new models in the exact same configuration as the previous ones and threw it on the printer. Or so I thought. Unfortunately, in my haste, I did actually mess up, and instead of loading the new file to print, I unfortunately selected the old file. I hadn't cleaned my USB or cleared anything from it, so I saw Death Corps of Krieg, clicked that first one, and lo and behold, no surprises here, that plate failed. But after giving the VAT a bit of a clean and chucking the right models on this time, they came out absolutely flawlessly. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the failed resins so far, I'll be mentioning that at the end of the video, but for this squad itself, it cost me only $4.31 and 78 mil of resin, which if you ask me is an absolute bargain. And for 20 models, it is definitely at this point outcompeting the GW equivalents. Now, the one thing I love about the Astra Militarum Combat Patrol is it comes with one of my favorite models in the entire Games Workshop range, and that is the Sentinel. Now, the proxy that I opted for from the Grimguard range was this Walker, which I think fills the role absolutely fantastically. And it's armed with arguably the coolest weapon choice, a plasma gun. So you know for a fact that I'll be printing that off. Overall, this model was going to take roughly just under 5 hours, and I was super excited to get it in my hand. Ultimately, this model printed up beautifully, and at a cost of $3.84, it used only 70 mil of resin all up, which is an absolute bargain. Next up, we do also have a command squad in this, and fortunately enough, Stationforge still has us covered with their models. These were super easy to print and came out absolutely flawlessly, taking only roughly 20 mil of resin for the lot, at a cost of $1.06. At this point, there is only a couple of things left to print for our combat patrol, so I decided to jump on over the battle weapons and get those printing. Now, I was super excited to print these, but did run into some issues. All of these guys were separated into 3 different folders, but the pre-supported folder that I wanted basically had every single part from all 6 different weapons sitting all together, which to me was very confusing. And without a lack of instructions or any sort of guide on what to print here, I was basically left guessing what I had to print for each of the weapon kit. Ultimately, I did end up making mistakes and printing the wrong things. After a little bit of hassle and trying to sort of scratch my head, I did figure out what parts I was going to need for this kit. And I ultimately decided to go for the rocket launcher, which who doesn't want a massive rocket launcher for their army? They look absolutely sick. Now I throw all these guys on and unfortunately enough, it did fail. The rocket pod itself pulled completely off the support. It was very disappointing, but I assume this happened because it wasn't hollowed and the fuel force from it was a little bit too much. So you might be thinking, why don't you just go in and support it yourself? Which I 100% would, but in my My Mini Factory, I re-downloaded these files and for the life of me, I can't find any unsupported files. I can find them for the crew, I can find supported files for the crew, I can find supported files for the guns themselves, but I can't find the actual unsupported guns themselves. So unfortunately, we're going to have to scrap the rocket pod and then move on to something else. I ultimately decided on this heavy laser destroyer and it sort of fills the same gap. So I decided to print up 2 of those guys, and once that was all done, it left me with an absolutely perfect print. Now, I did actually also miss a couple of parts, which I ended up coming back with later and printing in my Tech resin, because I didn't realize until assembling them that the main base plate for the guns was completely missing, which I feel like was a very easy mistake to just fix by having the files organized in a way that was by guns instead of just having them lumped in one folder. Now, these guys took only 3.5 hours to print, and I ended up having an extra bunch of crew that I could use amongst the other squads. Overall, it ended up costing me 88 mil of resin and only $4.48. I did have to reprint the failed missing bits, which ultimately has chipped away at our resin usage. But after reprinting the failed rocket pods and changing them for the 2 heavy laser turret, it added an extra 21 mil of resin, which is another $1.16 to our overall cost. It comes to a grand total of $5.64 for 2 battle weapons at a cost of only $2.82 each, which at this point, this combat patrol is starting to feel very, very cheap, even amongst all the fails. Believe it or not, with those models printed, that was our entire combat patrol, done and dusted. We have successfully printed an entire army in only 1 bundle of resin, but we still have a bunch left. And at this point, I ended up scouring through the catalog to see if I could really push the limits of this and print up something cool and big. Now, after thinking about it for a little while, I ultimately decided to 3D print the heavy artillery cannon, which from these pictures, who wouldn't? Unfortunately, this model did fail due to a lack of resin. Now, I was being really cocky with figuring out whether or not I could actually print it, and I managed to get roughly about 80% of the model successfully printed. So we're going to see exactly how much of it we can actually get assembled. After cobbling a bunch of the pieces together, I was very, very shocked to see that we actually had enough for a full model. Now, it wasn't exactly the big stubby cannon that I wanted, but we successfully printed the entire long-range artillery. Although there are a couple little pieces missing, I am super, super impressed that we managed to print this entire thing. And stealing a couple of the crew from the battle weapons, we can use them with this artillery cannon. Now, ultimately, if this entire print was successful, it would have only cost me 192 mil of resin and roughly $10.92, which would have actually made it the most expensive model in this kit. But again, since the files weren't organized, I wasn't 100% sure what parts to print, so we could have actually scrapped a few of those and probably just printed a couple more either characters or even some cool cavalry. As a little bonus, I did go ahead and 3D print bases for basically every single model in this army from my own base pack. So if you want to grab them for yourself, I do want to remind you that there is a link down in the description, and all the money and proceeds that go from that will be invested straight back into the channel to make better content for you guys. Because I am super excited to get in 3D printing, but unfortunately, as you could probably tell, these videos take a lot of time and effort, and I want to do them justice so that you guys have an enjoyable experience watching them. Now, with everything done and dusted and our resin completely done, it was time to calculate our wastage from everything. Now, overall, believe it or not, I only actually managed to have roughly about 50 grams of failed prints, which was a lot less than I originally thought I would have. Now, I didn't actually include the cleaned vat pieces from this. I'm going to include that later on in a little bit. just with the supports. With the heavy artillery pieces and the failed infantry squads, 50 mil of resin wastage is really not that bad. After assembling everything, I was also left with 67 grams of spare bits, which is pretty good, and I mean, I can always come back later, print a couple more bodies, and really make the bang for my buck. As for printed models, drumroll please, I managed to 3D print successfully 485 mil of resin, which I'm no mathematician, but seems to be a lot less than 1 kilo. That is less than half of the bottle in successful models. If you do include the bits, it does end up being roughly over 500 and something grams. That is a lot of resin wastage, so it's time to calculate exactly how much we wasted between the supports and all of that cleans. After adding everything up, minusing the fails, the successful prints, and the spare bits, we had roughly 400 milliliters of resin left for supports and VAT cleans, which is nearly half of our bottle on things that aren't the models themselves. Now, I could go in and support these models myself and save a little bit of money on resin, but for the most part, having these pre-supported bottles does make it a lot quicker and easier, and I was a little bit of a time crunch for this one, so these pre-supported files were an excellent way to get me up and running. Now for the question that everyone is wondering. What did it cost to print everything? And to start this off, we're going to go and see how much it would have cost me to buy all of these files. It only cost me $125 for all of these files, which isn't too bad if you ask me. Now, for the sake of this video and transparency, I'm going to be pricing all of these models at their full price that Stationforge has on their store. You can always pick them up for cheaper in their tribes if they have them as one of the monthly releases, or they do also regularly run sales where you can pick them up for up to 50% off, which could massively save you a bunch of money and possibly buy you another bottle of resin with that extra cash that you've saved. So there is definitely ways of cutting this cost down, but for the sake of this video, we're going to just calculate them at their full price. Now that we've got our files, we need to figure out how much our resin is, and I ended up paying $55 for this 1 kilo bottle. You can buy them in bulk lots of up to 10 kg and really cut that price down. Honestly, this resin's worth it. I could peg these models at the floor and they wouldn't break. Now, although it might have been cheaper to buy these STLs in resin than it would have been to buy the original Combat Patrol, it's not the only thing that we have to consider when it comes to 3D printing, because there are excess costs like gloves, safety equipment, the printer itself, and cleaning chemicals. So we're going to be adding those up now. First and foremost, I printed all of these guys on my Photon Mono X, which I originally bought for $430 a couple of years ago. Although it's now discontinued, they now have the Photon Mono X2, which retails for an absolute bargain of $300 dues, which, if you ask me, is an absolutely insane price to be paying for such a large print plate. But for the sake of this, I'm going to be using the price that I paid for my original machine. Now, I'll quickly rattle off a last few bits and pieces that we need. First up, we've got to buy a bunch of methylated spirits to clean everything. Now, you can pick up a 4-liter bottle of methylated spirits from Bunnings for roughly about $20. Overall, not a completely bad price. And you will also need gloves to handle all of this toxic chemicals, which for a box of 100 would set you back roughly about $10. Next up, we're going to need a wash and cure station, which will, for mine specifically, cost me roughly about $205. Now, adding this all up, it brings our grand total to a little over $700. $705 to be exact, which, if you ask me, is a lot more than a Combat Patrol that's brand new. With all this added together, it's going to cost you roughly $600 more to 3D print this entire Combat Patrol than it would be to buy it directly from Games Workshop themselves. You're probably sitting there at home and wondering, if I can just buy it for $200 from Games Workshop, why would I bother spending nearly $800 or $900 on all this equipment just to print it for slightly cheaper? I'm glad that you asked that. Now, 3D printing overall is a massive investment first and foremost, but fortunately enough, you don't have to worry about things like out of stocks, models being discontinued, and just being able to print whatever you want, whenever you want. So ultimately, over the long run, although the initial investment is quite high in this, you end up paying for your models within, depending on what you print, within weeks, months, or even, depending if it's a really expensive model, days. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the choice is yours. If you are a fan like I am of plastic kits, you'll probably still buy them. But also, like me, I love 3D printing. The accessibility, the proxy models, the unique sculpts that I get to see from people are so enjoyable to print, paint, and play with. Each of them have their positives and negatives, and it's your choice on whether or not you want to choose one or the other. But for me, I'm definitely going to be sticking in the middle and still going with both, because as much as I love my 3D printing and how cheap it is, I still love the feeling of a plastic kit in my hands and the satisfaction that comes with plastic glue. With all that said and done, I just want to say thank you to every single person who has gotten this far in the video. This has got to be one of the hardest and longest videos that I have ever made, so I genuinely appreciate you guys watching all the way through, and thank you for showing your support. If you'd like to show a little bit more support, as I mentioned before, make sure to grab my base pack from down below. You can base all of your armies in it, and I will be updating it in the coming week. If you also want to grab some stuff from my affiliate links down below, I've got some to Anycubic and Sunlu if you want to pick up the resin for yourself. Now, doing so costs nothing extra to you guys, but does give me a little bit of kickback and allows me to keep running this channel at no extra cost to you. If you did indeed enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it. I appreciate every single one of you who does it. And if we get enough likes, I might just do another one of these, because although it has been a bit of a pain and a very long process, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community of hobby heroes. You guys are the backbone of this channel and keep me running. And if you want to see me 3D print another combat patrol or maybe a whole army, make sure to leave a comment down in the comment section below. I would love to see what you guys want to see next. As always, thank you all for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. And until next time, happy hobbying everyone. Bye.